This page is a sub-page of the list of years in film page. This is a list of films that were released in 1926. Events. February. The oldest surviving animated feature film is released in the Weimar Republic, directed by Lot Reiniger. It is called The Adventures of Prince Ahmed. August 6. Warner Brothers debuts the first Vitaphone film, Don Juan. The Vitaphone system uses multiple 33 1/3 revolutions per minute gramophone records, developed by Bell Telephone Laboratories and Western Electric to play back music and sound effects synchronized with film. October 7. Warner Brothers released the second Vitaphone film, The Better Ole, starring Sidney Chaplin, Theodore W. Case and E.I. Sponable demonstrate their sound on film experiments to William Fox of the Fox Film Corporation. The Fox Case Corp. is formed in an effort to exploit the system, which is given the name Movietone. Fox began to create Movietone newsreels at this time. One of the first newsreels is of Charles Lindbergh's takeoff for Paris. Al Jolson films A Plantation Act, one of the first unreleased talkies and a test film for the jazz singer. Top-grossing films. Notable films released in 1926. USA. Unless stated, Three Bad Men, directed by John Ford. The Adventures of Prince Ahmed, directed by Lot Reiniger. Aloma of the South Seas, directed by Maurice Tourneur, starring Gilda Gray and William Powell. Bardelese the Magnificent, directed by King Vidor, starring John Gilbert and Eleanor Boardman. The Bat, directed by Roland West. Battling Butler, directed by and starring Buster Keaton. Beau Gester, directed by Herbert Brennan, starring Ronald Colman and Alice Joyce. The Bells, directed by James Young, starring Lionel Barrymore and Boris Karloff. Beverly of Graustark, directed by Sidney Franklin, starring Marion Davies and Antonio Moreno. The Black Pirate, directed by Albert Parker, starring Douglas Fairbanks and Billy Dove. La Boheme, directed by King Vidor, starring Lillian Gish, John Gilbert and Renee Adoree. Brown of Harvard, directed by Jack Conway, starring William Haynes, Jack Pickford and Mary Bryan. Bruderford and I Danger. Cab No. 13, directed by Michael Curtiz. Cruise of the Jasper B, starring Rod LaRocque, Mildred Harris and Snitz Edwards. Dangerous Traffic, directed by Bennett Cohen, starring Ralph Bushman, Mildred Harris and Jack Perrar. The Devil's Circus, starring Norma Shearer. The Devil's Wheel. Don Juan, directed by Alan Crosland, starring John Barrymore. Falesna Kosika Anib Kdyz Czizina Mini. Faust, directed by F. W. Murnau, starring Gosta Ekman and Emil Jannings. Flesh and the Devil, directed by Clarence Brown, starring John Gilbert and Greta Garbo. Fool's Luck, directed by Fatty Arbuckle, starring Lupino Lane and George Davis. For Heaven's Sake, directed by Sam Taylor, starring Harold Lloyd and Jobina Ralston. The General, starring Buster Keaton. The Golden Butterfly, directed by Michael Curtiz, starring Lily Dameter and Nils Asther. The Great Gatsby, directed by Herbert Brennan, starring Warner Baxter and Lois Wilson. The Great K&A Train Robbery, starring Tom Mix. Hands Up. The Holy Mountain, starring Lenny Riefenstahl. Irene, starring Colleen Moore. In color sequence by Technicolor. The Johnstown Flood, starring George O'Brien and Janet Gaynor. Kid Boots, starring Edie Cantor and Clara Bow. The Last Days of Pompeii. Love's Berries. Madam Mystery, directed by Richard Wallace and Stan Laurel, starring Theda Bara. The Magician, directed by Rex Ingram, starring Alice Terry. Man and Let's Go, a Far production, directed by Arthur Robertson, starring Lyda Putter. Mare Nostrum, directed by Rex Ingram, starring Antonio Marino and Alice Terry. Miss Mend, directed by Fyodor Otsape, starring Boris Barnett. Mother, directed by Vsevolod Pudovkon. My Stars, directed by Fatih Arbuckle. Nana, directed by Jean Renoir. Nell Gwyn, directed by Herbert Wilcox, starring Dorothy Gish, Randall Ayrton, Nelson, starring Cedric Hardwicke. Old Ironsides, directed by James Cruz, starring Esther Ralston. The Overcoat, A Page of Madness. Rienkai Les Hues, directed by Alberto Cavalcanti. The Scarlet Letter, starring Lillian Gish and Lars Hansen. The Sea Beast, starring John Barrymore, Dolores Costello and George O'Hara. The Show-Off, directed by Mal Street. Claire, starring Ford Sterling, Lois Wilson and Louise Brooks. The Son of the Sheikh, starring Rudolph Valentino and Vilma Banky. SO's Your Old Man, starring W.C. Fields. The Sorrows of Satan, starring Adolphe Menjou. Sparrows, directed by William Bodine, starring Mary Pickford. The Strong Man, starring Harry Langdon. The Student of Prague, starring Konrad Veidt, Werner Krauss, Agnes Esterhazy and Fritz Alberti. Tartuffer, directed by F. W. Murnau, starring Emil Jannings. The Temptress, starring Greta Garbo and Antonio Moreno. The 3 Million Trial. Torrent, starring Ricardo Cortez and Greta Garbo. Tramp, starring Harry Langdon and Joan Crawford. A Trip to Chinatown, starring Margaret Livingston and Elle Fox. The Triumph of the Rat, directed by Graham Cutts, starring Ivan Novello and Isabel Deans. The Volga Boatman, directed by Cecil B. DeMille, starring William Boyd. What Price Glory, starring Edmund Lowe, Victor McLaglen and Dolores Del Rio. The Winning of Barbara Worth, starring Ronald Colman, Vilma Banky and Gary Cooper. A Woman of the Sea, directed by Joseph von Sternberg, starring Edna Purviance. Comedy film series. Charlie Chaplin, Buster Keaton, Our Gang, Laurel and Hardy, Harry Langdon. Animated short film series. Felix the Cat, Coco the Clown. Alice comedies: Alice on the Farm, Alice's Balloon Race, Alice's Orphan, Alice's Little Parade, Alice's Mysterious Mystery, Alice Charms the Fish, Alice's Monkey Business, Alice in the Woolly West, Alice the Firefighter, Alice Cuts the Ice, Alice Helps the Romance, Alice's Spanish Guitar, Alice's Brown Derby, Alice the Lumberjack. Coco's Song Cartoons. Crazy Cat, Unnatural History. Pete the Pup. Births. January 14th Tom Tryon, actor, novelist. January 15th Maria Skell, actress. January 17th Moira Shearer, actress, dancer. January 19th Fritz Weaver, actor. January 20th Patricia Neal, actress. February 11th Leslie Nielsen, actor, comedian. February 16th John Schlesinger, director. February 20th Gillian Lynn, dancer, actress, choreographer. March 6th Andre Wajda, director. March 16th Jerry Lewis, actor. April 7th Prem Nazir, Indian actor. April 12th Jane Withers, actress. April 14th Gloria Jean, actress, singer. April 22nd Charlotte Ray, actress. April 30th Cloris Leachman, actress. May 8th Don Rickles, comedian and actor. May 11th Frank Thring, Australian actor. June 1st Andy Griffith, actor. Marilyn Monroe, actress. June 28th Mel Brooks, entertainer. July 10th Carlton Carpenter, actor, magician, author, songwriter. July 14th Harry Dean Stanton, actor. July 21st Norman Jewison, director. July 22nd Brian Forbes, director. August 7th Stan Freberg, voice actor, author, radio personality, comedian. August 29th Betty Lynn, actress. September 19th James Lipton, American actor, screenwriter, and presenter. October 17th Beverly Garland, actress. Julie Adams, actress. October 18th Klaus Kinski, actor. November 30th Richard Crenno, actor. Deaths. January 30th Barbara Lamar, actress. February 6th Carrie Clark Ward, actress. April 20, Billy Quirk, actor. March 2, Victory Bateman, actress. July 22, Willard Lewis, actor. August 22, Joe Moore, actor, brother of Mary Moore, Matt Moore, Owen Moore and Tom Moore. August 23, Rudolph Valentino, actor. August 30, Eddie Lyons, American actor. September 8, Kisaburo Kurihara, Japanese actor. September 11, Matsunosuke Ono, actor. October 31, Harry Houdini, magician and actor. November 7, Tom Foreman, silent film actor and director. November 8, James K. Hackett, stage and silent film actor. November 17, Harold Bosberg, silent film actor. Film debuts: Mickey Rooney, Not to be Trusted, as Mickey McBain. John Wayne Brown of Harvard,